The orange glow painted the Montana sky like a wound bleeding light into the darkness. Samuel Whitehorse pressed his face against the cold earth, watching his family's cabin collapse into itself, while 3 men on horseback circled the inferno like vultures celebrating carrion. Their laughter cut through the crackling flames, each sound a knife twisted deeper into his chest. His wife Martha and their 2 children had been inside when the fire started. Samuel had been checking the livestock in the barn when he heard the first shouts, then saw the torches flying through their windows. By the time he reached the cabin, the flames had already claimed everything he loved. The men wore no masks, showed no shame. They wanted him to see their faces, to know exactly who had destroyed his world. "That'll teach you to stay where you belong, half-breed," shouted the largest rider, a man Samuel recognized as Deputy Marshal Crawford. And the other 2 were Crawford's brothers, known throughout the territory for their cruelty toward anyone who wasn't pure white. They had warned Samuel before about his mixed Cherokee blood, about his success with the trading post, about how he was getting too comfortable among civilized folk. Samuel remained hidden in the shadows, his hunting rifle within reach, but his hands trembling too violently to aim. 3 against 1, and they were mounted while he lay prone in the dirt. Charging now would mean certain death, and death would mean no justice for Martha and the children. So he watched, memorizing every detail of their faces, burning their laughter into his memory deeper than any brand. The cabin's roof beam crashed down with a sound like thunder, sending sparks spiraling toward the stars. In that moment, Samuel Whitehorse died alongside his family. What remained was something harder, colder, infinitely more patient. Something that would make those men wish they had killed him that night, instead of leaving him alive to remember. Dawn revealed the full scope of the devastation. Samuel walked through the smoking ruins with the methodical pace of a man cataloging evidence. Every charred beam, every melted piece of metal, every fragment of bone told part of the story he would carry forever. The trading post next to the cabin had been spared, but everything inside worth taking was gone. They had been thorough in their destruction. The nearest neighbor, old Henrik, arrived with the sun. He took one look at Samuel's face and said nothing about sympathy or God's will. Instead, he helped gather what remained of the bodies for burial. They worked in silence, 2 men who understood that some losses carved wounds too deep for words. Henrik had lost his own family to cholera 3 winters back, and he recognized the particular emptiness that comes from being the sole survivor of love. Samuel buried his family on the hill behind where the cabin had stood, marking each grave with stones he selected for their weight and permanence. He spoke no prayers, made no promises to the dead. The time for prayers had passed with the flames. What he whispered over those graves was something else entirely, words in Cherokee that his grandmother had taught him about debts that must be paid and spirits that demand justice. The territorial sheriff arrived that afternoon, on a weak man named Dalton who owed his position to political connections rather than competence. He examined the scene with the enthusiasm of someone fulfilling an unwelcome obligation. When Samuel described the 3 men, their faces, their words, Dalton's expression grew uncomfortable. Crawford was his deputy after all, and the Crawford brothers had friends in high places throughout the territory. "Hard to prove anything without witnesses," Dalton mumbled, avoiding Samuel's eyes. "Hey, could have been anyone. Lot of drifters through these parts." Samuel said nothing, but something in his silence made the sheriff nervous enough to mount his horse and leave without asking any more questions. That night, Samuel sat among the ruins and began planning with the patience of a man who had nothing left to lose and all the time in the world. Samuel spent the following months transforming himself from grieving widower into something far more dangerous. He sold what remained of his trading post to Henrik for enough money to disappear, then began the careful work of learning everything about his enemies. The Crawford brothers were creatures of habit, and habits could be exploited, by a man with sufficient patience and planning. Deputy Marshal Crawford was the eldest and most brutal, a man who used his badge as license for cruelty. He frequented the saloon every Tuesday and Friday, always staying until closing, or always riding home alone along the river road. His middle brother, Thomas, ran a small ranch outside town where he bred horses and beat his workers with equal enthusiasm. The youngest, William, was a gambler who traveled between settlements, cheating at cards and leaving broken men in his wake. Samuel studied them like a naturalist observing dangerous animals, learning their patterns, their weaknesses, their fears. He grew his hair long and let his beard cover his face, transforming his appearance until even neighbors who had known him for years would pass him on the street without recognition. He practiced moving silently through forests and towns, becoming a ghost who could observe without being seen. The Cherokee side of his heritage, which the Crawford brothers had mocked, became his greatest asset. His grandmother's teachings about tracking, about reading sign, about moving like wind through the wilderness, all returned to him with the clarity of desperation. He learned to think like his prey, to anticipate their movements, to position himself always one step ahead of their expectations. By winter, Samuel had become someone else entirely. The gentle trader who had once welcomed all customers with equal courtesy was gone, replaced by a predator who understood that justice sometimes required abandoning civilization's rules, and he was ready to begin collecting the debt that had been accumulating interest in his heart since that night of flames and laughter. William Crawford died on a cold February night outside a gambling house in Helena, 3 days' ride from where Samuel's family had burned. The youngest Crawford brother had been celebrating a particularly profitable evening of cards when he stumbled into the alley behind the saloon, drunk on whiskey and his own cleverness. He never saw the shadow that detached itself from the darkness behind the building. Samuel had waited for hours in that alley, knowing William's habits, knowing he would eventually seek privacy to count his winnings away from envious eyes. The attack was swift and silent, a knife between the ribs that punctured the heart before William could even cry out. But Samuel wasn't interested in a quick death. He wanted William to understand why he was dying. I wanted him to remember the laughter from that night of flames. "Do you remember a cabin that burned last autumn?" Samuel whispered into William's ear as the man's life leaked away onto the frozen ground. "Do you remember the family inside?" Recognition flickered in William's eyes, followed by terror as he realized that the dead had somehow returned to collect their due. Samuel held him until the light faded, then arranged the body to look like a robbery gone wrong. The news reached the other Crawford brothers within a week. William's death was officially recorded as the work of unknown thieves, but Samuel knew his message had been received. He watched from the shadows as Deputy Marshal Crawford attended his brother's funeral, saw the way the man's eyes constantly scanned the crowd, searching for threats that might be hiding among the mourners. Thomas Crawford hired extra men to guard his ranch and began carrying 2 pistols instead of 1. And the middle brother understood that William's death was no random crime, even if he couldn't prove it. Fear had entered their lives like smoke seeping through cracks, and Samuel found satisfaction in knowing they would never again feel completely safe. The education in terror had begun, and there were still 2 more lessons to teach. Thomas Crawford lasted until spring, his paranoia and extra guards proving insufficient against an enemy who had learned patience from the wilderness itself. Samuel spent weeks studying the ranch, learning the routines of every worker, every guard, every animal. He discovered that Thomas had a weakness for a particular prostitute in town, a woman named Rose, who worked at the hotel and charged premium prices for her discretion. Samuel approached Rose not as a customer, but as a businessman with a proposition. He offered her enough money to leave the territory and start fresh somewhere else, in exchange for one small favor. All she had to do was send Thomas a message requesting a private meeting at an abandoned line shack 5 miles from town, a place where they had met before when Thomas wanted absolute privacy. Rose took the money and asked no questions. She had seen enough violence in her profession to recognize when a man was beyond reasoning or mercy. Samuel's eyes held the same emptiness she had seen in soldiers returning from Indian wars, who read the look of someone who had traveled too far into darkness to find their way back to the light. Thomas arrived at the line shack alone, as Samuel had known he would. Pride and lust made men predictable, and Thomas Crawford possessed both in abundance. He entered the shack expecting to find Rose waiting for him, but instead discovered Samuel sitting calmly at the small table, his hands folded like a man conducting business. "You remember me," Samuel said, and it wasn't a question. Thomas went for his gun, but Samuel had anticipated that reaction. The knife that had killed William found Thomas's throat before the pistol cleared its holster. This time, Samuel took longer with his explanation, describing in detail how Martha and the children had died, how their screams had mixed with the Crawford brothers' laughter. Thomas died understanding exactly what debt he was paying and why payment had come due. Deputy Marshal Crawford was the most dangerous of the 3 brothers, and Samuel saved him for last not out of mercy but out of strategy. Crawford had authority, connections, and the survival instincts of a man who had killed many times without consequence. After his brothers' deaths, Crawford had requested additional deputies and rarely traveled alone. He had also begun asking questions about Samuel Whitehorse, wondering aloud what had happened to the half-breed trader whose family had died in that unfortunate fire. Samuel knew that Crawford suspected him, but suspicion without proof was merely another form of fear. He allowed himself to be seen occasionally, always at a distance, always when Crawford was surrounded by witnesses and safety. These glimpses served a purpose beyond intimidation. They confirmed Crawford's growing paranoia while establishing Samuel's presence in places far from where the next strike would actually occur. The deputy marshal's weakness was his pride in his position, his need to appear fearless before the men who served under him. When reports came of cattle rustlers operating near the territorial border, Crawford insisted on leading the pursuit personally, despite the obvious danger of leaving town. He took 4 deputies with him, men who respected his reputation for violence but had never faced an enemy like Samuel Whitehorse. Samuel had been tracking the rustlers for weeks, not to stop them, but to understand their patterns. He knew where they would strike next, knew the route Crawford would take in pursuit, knew exactly where the deputy marshal would make camp on the second night of the chase. Patience had become Samuel's greatest weapon, and he wielded it with the precision of a master craftsman. The attack came at dawn, when Crawford's men were drowsy from night watches and confident in their numbers. Samuel moved through their camp like death itself, silent and inexorable. He killed the deputies first, quickly and quietly, saving Crawford for last. When the deputy marshal woke to find himself alone among corpses, Samuel was sitting beside the dying campfire, waiting. Crawford reached for his gun with the desperation of a man who finally understood that his reckoning had arrived. Samuel made no move to stop him, simply watched as the deputy marshal's hands shook too violently to draw the weapon properly. Fear had robbed Crawford of the coordination that had made him dangerous, reducing him to a trembling shadow of the man who had laughed while children burned. "You know why I'm here?" Samuel said, his voice carrying no emotion beyond simple statement of fact. Crawford nodded, his throat too constricted by terror to form words. The deputy marshal had spent months imagining this moment, but the reality was worse than his nightmares. Samuel's eyes held no anger, no hatred, only the terrible patience of justice delayed but never denied. Samuel described the night of the fire in precise detail, forcing Crawford to relive every moment of his family's destruction. He spoke of Martha's final screams, of the children's terror, of the sound their bones made when the roof collapsed. Crawford wept as he listened, not from remorse, but from the knowledge that his own death would be far slower and more deliberate than anything he had inflicted on others. The killing took hours. Samuel, using techniques his Cherokee grandmother had taught him for dealing with enemies who deserved special attention. He kept Crawford conscious throughout, ensuring the deputy marshal experienced every moment of payment for the debt he had incurred. When it was finally over, Samuel felt no satisfaction, no relief, only the hollow completion of a task that had consumed everything he once was. Samuel left Crawford's body for the wolves and rode away from the territorial border, disappearing into the vast wilderness that had shaped him. Some said he returned to his Cherokee relatives in the east. Others claimed that he became a ghost haunting the mountains, appearing whenever innocent families needed protection from men like the Crawford brothers. The truth was simpler and more terrible. Samuel Whitehorse had become justice itself, patient and implacable, forever seeking balance in a world that had forgotten the price of cruelty. The cabin was never rebuilt, but travelers still speak of seeing smoke rising from that hill on certain nights, and of hearing laughter that turns to screaming when the wind changes direction. What do you think justice looks like when the law fails? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that explore the darker corners of human nature. Sometimes the most powerful tales are the ones that leave us questioning everything we thought we knew about right and wrong.